The metal bat came down hard against the German Shepherd's collar tag, and the sound rang through the bus like a gunshot. Every passenger flinched. Every passenger except her. The woman in blue scrubs didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't even raise her voice. She simply dropped to one knee beside the trembling dog, placed one hand flat against his chest, and looked up at the man holding the bat with an expression so controlled, so absolutely still, that the air in the vehicle changed instantly. The bully had expected tears. What he got instead felt like standing at the edge of something he didn't have the vocabulary to name. If this story already has you holding your breath, you're exactly where I want you. Follow my channel so you don't miss a single part of what happens next, and drop a like while you're here. Most importantly, tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The Route 9 city bus pulled away from the Caldwell Street terminal at 6:47 in the morning, and Nora Callahan was already regretting the seat she had chosen. She had taken the window spot near the middle doors, habit more than preference, and settled her medical bag between her feet before the bus had finished its first acceleration. The bag was worn at the corners, canvas faded from navy to something closer to gray, with a small loop of red paracord knotted around the zipper pull. She had tied that cord herself, 4 years ago, in a forward operating base in a country she was no longer allowed to discuss. The knot was a figure 8. She still tied everything that way. Beside her, occupying more than half the seat and a portion of the aisle, sat Kodiak. I was a German shepherd, large even for the breed, with a coat that ran from dark sable at his shoulders to a warm tan along his legs. He wore a regulation service vest, deep green with reflective strips, and a metal identification tag that had been dented on one corner from an incident Nora did not think about on good days. Kodiak sat with his spine perfectly straight and his dark eyes moving in slow, deliberate arcs across the interior of the bus, cataloging passengers the way he had been trained to catalog threats. He wasn't cataloging threats right now, but the behavior never fully switched off, in him or in her. Nora was 28 years old and looked, at first glance, like someone who had not slept in 2 days. This was accurate. She had worked a 12-hour overnight shift at Meridian General Hospital in the city of Portwell, where she had been employed as a floor nurse in the trauma surgery unit for the past 7 months. The shift had included 2 emergency surgical assists, one patient who had coded and been brought back, and a 40-minute argument with a senior attending physician over a medication dosage that Nora had ultimately been correct about. She had not said, "I told you so," when the labs came back confirming her assessment. She had simply updated the chart and moved to the next patient. She was not good at arguments. She was very good at being right quietly. The scrubs she wore were pale blue, slightly wrinkled from the locker she had stuffed them into 18 hours earlier. Her dark hair was pulled back with a rubber band she had found in a supply drawer. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, except for a plain watch with a cracked bezel and a pair of running shoes that were technically against hospital dress code, but that nobody had ever called her out on because she moved fast enough in them that the supervisors had decided the policy wasn't worth enforcing on her specifically. She had her phone out but was not looking at it. She was watching the street through the window, tracking the city as it moved past. The early vendors opening steel shutters on storefronts, the dog walkers, the delivery trucks double parked on Harmon Avenue, the small gaps in the traffic pattern that told her, without her consciously deciding to think about it, how quickly someone could move through this block if they needed to. Portwell was not a dangerous city, but Nora had spent enough years in places that the habit of reading terrain was now as automatic as breathing. She was not anxious. She was simply awake in a way most people on this bus were not. Kodiak shifted his weight and pressed his head briefly against her knee. She put a hand on his neck without looking down, rubbing the spot behind his left ear that he had liked since he was 14 months old, back when he had first been assigned to her unit. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I know," she said very quietly. "Almost home." The bus filled gradually at each stop. A few students with headphones, a construction worker with a thermos, 2 older women talking loudly about a neighborhood council meeting, a man in a gray raincoat who sat near the back and immediately fell asleep against the window. By the time Route 9 crossed the bridge over Fenner Creek and entered the Dockside neighborhood, the vehicle was close to 2/3 full and smelling exactly like a city bus in late October, damp coats, coffee breath, and the faint metallic tang of exhaust, working its way through the floor vents. Nora had almost closed her eyes when the rear doors opened at the Callaway Street stop and two young men got on. She noticed them the way she noticed everything, without appearing to notice at all. The taller one was maybe 22, wearing a red cap turned backwards and a jacket with the collar flipped up. He had a phone out and was recording before he had fully stepped onto the bus, the camera panning slowly across the interior like he was scouting locations. The second one was younger, maybe 19, with a duffel bag over one shoulder and the twitchy, half-present energy of someone who hadn't yet decided what kind of day he was having. He kept glancing at the taller one for cues, which told Nora something about the dynamic between them before either had opened his mouth. She looked away. She heard them move down the aisle, the taller one's voice rising in volume the way people's voices do when they are performing for an audience. In this case, the phone, whose little red recording dot was still on. He was saying something to his companion about the bus, about the passengers, his tone sliding between commentary and mockery with the easy fluency of someone who had practiced this particular routine before. They settled into the seats directly across the aisle from Nora. The taller one, she would learn later that his name was Troy Sabin, leaned forward almost immediately and pointed the phone at Kodiak. "Yo, what is that?" he said. Not a question. On announcement. His companion, Denny Rourke, made a sound that was half laugh and half invitation for more. Kodiak's ears moved. He did not turn his head. "Service dog," Nora said, not looking away from the window. "Please don't point things at him." Troy tilted the phone closer. "Service dog doing what? Sitting there looking dumb?" "He's working." "Working." Troy repeated the word with theatrical disbelief, turning to show Denny the camera, making sure the reaction was recorded. "Bro, this dog is literally just sitting there. What's he working on, the rent?" Several passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. The two older women stopped talking about the council meeting. Nobody said anything. Nora said nothing either. She was watching the window, but she had stopped seeing the street. "Is that even a real service vest?" Troy leaned further into the aisle. "Because I've seen fakes online. You can buy those things for like $30. Anyone can put a vest on a dog and take him anywhere." "He's a certified military working dog," Nora said evenly. "His documentation is in my bag if you want to see it." "Oh yeah? Let me see." She did not move toward her bag. "I said if you want to see it. I don't owe you anything." Troy looked at the camera. "She doesn't owe me anything." He said it with a grin that was designed to make her sound unreasonable. "I'm just asking a question. I'm just being curious. Right, chat?" He was live streaming. That much was clear now. Nora recalculated the situation, not in a dramatic way, not with any visible adjustment of her posture, but in the particular interior way she had been trained to do, rapidly, continuously, without effect. He had an audience. That meant he needed to escalate to hold attention. That meant he would not simply lose interest and stop. She kept her voice level. "I'm asking you to leave the dog alone. That's all." "Why? Is he dangerous?" "He's been through a lot." "What, like therapy? Does the dog have trauma?" Troy laughed, showing the camera. "This lady's telling me her dog has trauma." Denny shifted in his seat, something pulling at the corner of his expression that wasn't quite amusement. He did not say anything. Kodiak had not moved, but beneath Nora's hand she could feel the change in the quality of his stillness. Not aggression, not fear. Something older than either. The particular tension of an animal who has heard a sound frequency that his body associates with something specific and terrible and not entirely past. The bat from before. Troy's voice had a similar metallic sharpness when it rose. The rhythm of harassment, even verbal harassment, carried specific patterns of unpredictability that Kodiak's nervous system had been trained to respond to. He had been trained in conflict environments. He had survived them. He carried them now in the same way Nora carried her figure-8 knots and her seat-against-the-wall habits, in the body, below language. Troy reached out and tapped Kodiak's water bowl with his foot, a small silver travel bowl that Nora had clipped to her bag strap. The tap became a kick. The bowl skidded 4 feet across the bus floor and struck the base of a seat. Several passengers made sounds. The bus driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Owen Birch, glanced up in his mirror but said nothing, caught between the twin poles of intervention and protocol. Kodiak made a low sound in his throat. Not a growl. Something below that. Nora reached the bowl in 2 steps, picked it up, came back, and clipped it to her bag again. She sat down. She did not look at Troy. Hey, I was going to get that for you, Troy said. Thank you for your concern. You're welcome. The performative pleasantness in his voice was worse than hostility. So what do? You a nurse or something? He was reading her scrubs. Yes. You work nights? Yes. That why you look like that? She turned her head and looked at him directly for the first time. It was not an aggressive look. It was not a threatening look. It was simply a look, the kind of completely unguarded, fully present attention that people rarely directed at strangers on public transit, the kind that said, without words, I see you. All of you. I have already decided what you are. Troy blinked, just once. Then the performance came back up. What, are you going to report me? I'm not doing anything. I'm just talking. He held the phone out wider, getting Nora and Kodiak both in the frame. Chat, does this dog look like a service dog to you? Somebody tell her he doesn't look like a service dog. 2 stops passed. The construction worker got off. A woman with a stroller got on and immediately looked alarmed by the tension without being able to identify its source. The elderly man sitting 1 row ahead of Nora. She had clocked him when she boarded, late 70s, hearing aids in both ears, a paper grocery bag balanced on his knees, turned in his seat. Young man, he said to Troy, in the careful, precise voice of someone who had decided this had gone on long enough. That animal is clearly a service animal. This woman is clearly a medical professional returning from a shift. If you have nothing constructive to add to this bus ride, I would appreciate it if you simply sat quietly. Troy looked at him. The look was slow and deliberate and not remotely pleasant. Old man, he said, nobody asked you. I'm asking myself, the elderly man said. Troy leaned across the aisle and grabbed the man's grocery bag by the handle. The bag tore slightly at the top. The elderly man made a startled sound and reached for it, and Troy yanked it out of his reach, dropping the contents, a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, a jar of something, into the aisle with a crash that broke the eggs and sent the jar rolling. Then, while Denny stared in clear alarm, Troy reached into the man's jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. It happened in under 4 seconds. The bus was briefly, completely silent. Nora was already standing. Put it back, she said. Troy tucked the wallet into his own jacket. Or what? She said it again, same volume, same tone. Put it back. Lady. Troy's voice dropped. The performance quality came off it, and what was left was something simpler and uglier. Sit down, I'm not kidding. The elderly man, she would learn later his name was Harold Spence, was gripping the torn bag with both hands and looking at his broken eggs on the floor with the expression of a person who cannot decide whether to cry or simply absorb this into the long catalog of indignities that constitute a city life. He did not look at Troy. He did not look at Nora. He looked at the eggs. Denny stood up. Not in a threatening way. He stood up the way people stand up when they want to be anywhere else. Troy, man. Sit down, Troy said to him. Denny sat down. Nora looked at Denny directly. He met her eyes for half a second and looked away. She filed that away. The bus continued north. Owen Birch, in the driver's seat, had one hand below the dashboard now. Nora noticed the slight angle of his elbow, activating something. Emergency signal or phone, she couldn't be certain, but either way the behavior was intentional and controlled, which meant Owen Birch was not panicking. He was managing. She adjusted for that. Troy picked up Nora's medical bag from the floor. She had not heard him do it. She had been watching Denny. The grab was quick and deliberate, and he held the bag up in the air with one hand, phone still running in the other. What's in here? Medical equipment. Put it down. It's heavy. You got drugs in here? Stethoscope, trauma kit, IV supplies, gloves. She kept her voice entirely flat. It's a nurse's bag. Put it down. Show me. No. Troy unzipped the top. Nora crossed the aisle in 2 steps and put her hand on the bag strap, not pulling, just holding. Troy tightened his grip. They stood like that for a moment, 2 people holding either end of the same object, and the bus felt very small. You sure you want to do this? She said. You threatening me? I'm asking a question. He shoved her. Both hands, center of mass, a hard push designed to send her back into the seats. She moved with it, not catching herself on anything, just redirecting her weight, taking 1 step back and stopping. No stumble, no grab for a handrail. She simply stopped, like a door being closed. Troy stared at her. Denny made a sound that was not a word. Then Troy reached into his duffel bag. The duffel had been sitting under the seat since he boarded. She had noted it, had noted the weight and the way he carried it, had approximate calculated its contents as either moderately heavy tools or a moderate quantity of retail boxed goods, neither option particularly alarming on its own. What came out of it now changed that assessment. The baseball bat was aluminum, about 26 inches, with the grip tape partially unwound at one end. Not new, used. The kind of object that carries specific intentions in the way it is held. Troy held it the way a person holds something they have held before, in exactly this type of situation. The bus passengers, those who could see, reacted immediately, the kind of involuntary physical compression that crowds perform in the presence of a weapon, pulling in, sitting back, not leaving, not able to leave, the doors not opening between stops. The woman with the stroller made a small, sharp sound and positioned herself between the weapon and her child in a movement so instinctive it happened before she knew she was doing it. Harold Spence went very still. Denny said, "Troy, come on." "Shut up," Troy said. He was not performing anymore. The camera was still running, but he had stopped thinking about the camera. He pointed the bat toward Kodiak. "I'm going to take the dog off this bus. You can either let me or we can make this ugly." Kodiak's response was not a bark. It was not a lunge. It was a sound Nora had only heard from him twice before, and both times had been in conditions she did not discuss. And the sound itself was not loud, which made it worse. A low, sustained vocalization that came from somewhere deeper than his throat, the specific register of an animal communicating in a language that does not require translation. But his body was wrong. He was still sitting, but the tension in him had shifted from operational to something older. His eyes were fixed on the bat. Not on Troy, on the bat. The aluminum, the length, the angle of it. Something about the angle. Nora knew why. She had been there when it happened. In the village outside Baraka Province, with the temperature at 104 and the air smelling of diesel and burned plastic, when the ambush had come from the east side of the compound and a piece of falling corrugated roofing, metal, sharp, the shape and sound of it not unlike a bat swinging down through dust, had knocked Kodiak off his feet and taken out his handler in the same movement. The handler's name had been Sergeant First Class Dale Mercer, and he had been the most competent man Nora had ever worked beside, and she had not been able to reach him in time, and Kodiak had spent 3 weeks in a military veterinary unit before being cleared to return to service, and had never, after that, responded normally to sudden metal sounds coming from above. That was what Troy had in his hand. That was what Troy was pointing at the dog. Nora stepped in front of Kodiak. She did not do it dramatically. She just moved, 3 steps forward, positioning herself between the bat and the dog, and then she knelt down to Kodiak's level, her back to Troy, which was either the most controlled thing anyone on the bus had ever seen or the most terrifying, depending on how much they understood what it meant. "Kodiak." Her voice was very low. Not soft. Low. Precise. "Look at me." The dog's eyes found hers. "You're on the bus. We're going home. It's the bus." His breathing was wrong, too fast, too shallow. The muscle along his jaw was jumping. "I've got this," she said. "You hear me? I've got this." Troy raised the bat. The woman with the stroller screamed. Harold Spence threw himself sideways in his seat, instinctive and undignified and completely human. Denny came halfway out of his seat and then stopped, frozen in the specific paralysis of a person who wants very much to do something and cannot identify what. The bat came down. Not at Nora. Not quite. Troy adjusted the swing at the last second, an arc that struck the metal collar tag on Kodiak's vest with a sharp, ringing crack, the kind of sound that is not painful on its own, but carries enough pure metallic vibration to rattle through a trained animal's entire nervous system. Kodiak made a sound that was not the low vocalization from before. This one was shorter, involuntary, the sound a dog makes when something bypasses training entirely and lands directly in the part of the brain that simply, purely reacts. Then he went still. Not calm. Still. The specific stillness of a highly trained animal executing the last instruction he had been given and holding to it because the instruction was the only thing anchoring him to the present moment. Nora's hand was on his chest. She could feel his heart. She stood up. Troy was pulling the bat back for another swing when she turned around, and the expression on her face stopped him. Not rage. Rage would have been manageable. Rage was something he had experience with, something he could work with and around. What Nora Callahan's face held at that moment was something different, a quality of attention that had no social component to it, no performance, no negotiation. She had stopped being a tired nurse trying to get home. She had stopped being a woman in a difficult situation trying to manage it politely. She had simply become what 7 years of specific training had made her, at the moment when training and necessity aligned completely. "Last chance," she said. Troy swung the bat. What happened next took less than 4 seconds, and would later be described, by the 3 passengers close enough to see it clearly, in 3 completely different ways, none of which were inaccurate. The bus driver, Owen Birch, looking in his mirror, would later tell the responding officers that it looked like the woman simply wasn't where the bat was going, and then the man holding the bat was against the floor. The technique itself was not complicated. In close-quarters situations, in tight spaces, a swinging implement loses most of its threat if you are inside its arc. The critical step is the first one, getting inside the swing, and the critical factor for that step is timing, and timing under pressure requires exactly one thing, the absence of hesitation. Nora had no hesitation. She stepped inside the swing, her left hand catching Troy's wrist at the apex of the arc, her right palm driving into the joint in a specific direction that reversed the leverage entirely. The bat left his hand. Her knee came up and she used his own forward momentum against him, guiding him face first toward the seat pole rather than throwing him. Throwing would have sent him into passengers, and controlling the impact so that it was stunning but not structurally damaging. Troy hit the pole with his shoulder and went down. The bat bounced twice on the bus floor and stopped against Harold Spence's shoe. Troy was on his hands and knees, dazed, processing what had happened. Nora was standing behind him, one hand firm on his wrist in a hold that was exquisitely painful if he moved and merely extremely uncomfortable if he stayed still. "Stay down," she said. He tried to stand up. She adjusted the hold. He made a sound and stopped trying. Denny had not moved. He was sitting with his back pressed against the bus window, watching, and his face had gone through approximately 6 different expressions in the last 4 seconds, and had settled on something that was not quite fear and not quite relief, and was entirely honest. "You were in the military," Denny said. It was not an accusation. It was the statement of someone who has just had a significant piece of information organize itself. Nora said nothing. She was looking at Kodiak. He had not moved from his position. He was sitting exactly where she had left him, his vest straight, his posture correct, his eyes on her. But something in the dog was trembling very finely, underneath the stillness. She could see it in the muscles of his jaw, in the angle of his ears. "Good boy," she said across the bus. "Stay." His ears moved. A small adjustment, not a command response, something more personal. Harold Spence had retrieved the bat from near his shoe and was holding it in both hands, not threateningly, but with the careful grip of a man ensuring it did not slide away and cause further problems. He looked at Nora with an expression that was complicated and grateful and slightly awed. The bus had stopped, not at a scheduled stop. Owen Birch had pulled over to the shoulder of Danner Street with his hazards on, and Nora could hear, through the bus's thin walls, the specific audio frequency of approaching sirens. More than one unit. Owen had made the call. Troy's arm trembled in her grip. He said something she chose not to respond to. Denny, very quietly, said, "I've got some of the stuff. From the other ones. In the bag, if that matters." Nora looked at him. He met her eyes. His jaw was tight, and he was clearly working through something, and whatever he was working through landed somewhere specific, because he reached into the duffel bag without being asked and placed 3 wallets and 2 phones on the seat beside him. "There's more," he said, "but those are the ones from today." Troy said his name in a voice that was supposed to be threatening and was instead exhausted. Denny did not look at Troy. The sirens were close now, red and blue light beginning to flicker through the bus windows, striping the seats, the passengers, the scattered broken eggs still lying on the aisle floor. Harold Spence had not released the bat. The woman with the stroller was making quiet, soothing sounds to her child. The passengers who had been near the back were beginning to move forward, cautiously, in the way people move when a situation has clarified itself, and they are trying to understand what role they should play and what comes next. Nora held Troy's wrist until she heard the first officer's knock on the bus door. Then she looked at Denny. "When they come in," she said, "tell them everything, not most of it, everything." He nodded. She looked back at Troy, who was staring at the floor, and his face had a quality of collapse that was not physical, the structural collapse of someone whose plan has failed so completely that there is no interior reorganization available. He had gotten on this bus with a specific understanding of how power worked, and who held it, and what the nurse in the blue scrubs was going to do when pushed. He had been wrong in every category. And the part of him that was still calculating, still trying to find the angle that made this survivable, was beginning to understand that there was an aspect of this situation he had not accounted for at all. The live stream had been running the entire time. Everything that had happened, the theft, the threats, the bat, the confession Denny had just made, and what had happened to Troy in the last 4 seconds had been broadcast continuously to whatever audience had been watching his channel. The officer knocked again. Owen Birch opened the doors, and in the back of the bus, sitting behind everyone else, where he had been largely invisible since Callaway Street, a man in a dark jacket with a close-cropped gray beard looked at Nora across the length of the vehicle with an expression of recognition that she did not see because she was watching the door and not the back of the bus. The man's name was not one she would have recognized, but he recognized hers, and more specifically, he recognized the insignia on the worn canvas bag she was holding, a small patch no larger than a quarter, faded but legible to anyone who knew what they were looking at. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He reached into his own jacket and took out a phone, and what he did with it next was not a call and not a text, but something that would move significantly faster than either, through channels that did not appear on any public directory. Outside, the first officer stepped onto the bus. Inside, Kodiak finally exhaled, a long, slow breath through his nose, his body releasing by increments the tension he had been holding for the past 20 minutes. He looked at Nora. She was still standing between him and everything else. He lay down, put his chin on his paws, and waited. The first officer through the door was young, mid-20s, Nora guessed, with the careful posture of someone who had been told about this situation over radio, but was still calibrating the reality of it in real time. He scanned the bus in a single sweep, took in Troy on his knees, Denny sitting with his hands visible, and the wallets and phones arranged beside him, Nora standing with one hand still on Troy's wrist, and Harold Spence gripping an aluminum bat with both hands, like a man who had decided he was done being passive about anything. "Ma'am," the officer said to Nora, "can you step back for me?" "He'll try to run," she said. "Left knee. He's been favoring it since he went down." The officer looked at Troy's knee, looked at Nora, processed the information, and then moved to take her position with the kind of speed that suggested he had decided in approximately 2 seconds that she knew what she was talking about. She released Troy's wrist. Troy did not try to run. His left knee, as she had observed, was at an angle that made running inadvisable. A second officer was already moving through the bus, and a third had stopped at the door to speak into his radio. Outside, Nora could see 2 patrol units angled on the shoulder of Danner Street with their lights on, and what looked like a paramedic vehicle pulling in behind them, which meant Owen Birch had been specific in his emergency call. She made a note to tell him he had handled it well. She would probably forget. She moved back toward Kodiak. He had his chin on his paws and was tracking the officers with his eyes, but not his head, the way he did when he had assessed something as non-threatening, but not yet dismissed. She sat beside him, put her hand flat on his back, and felt the fine trembling in him slowly, gradually, begin to ease. "You did good," she said. His tail moved once, a single slow arc. The next 40 minutes were organized chaos of the specific variety that follows a situation where the official response arrives after the physical crisis has already been resolved. There were questions for Nora, questions for the passengers, questions for Owen Birch, who gave his account with the steady, factual clarity of a man who had been driving city buses for 19 years and had seen enough incidents that he had developed a personal methodology for incident reports. The wallets and phones. Denny had placed on the seat were photographed and bagged. Harold Spence's broken eggs were photographed, evidence of the property destruction. And Harold himself was interviewed while a paramedic checked him over, which he submitted to with reluctant dignity and an obvious preference for being somewhere else. Troy was cuffed and removed from the bus. He said nothing on the way out, which was different from the man who had boarded at Callaway Street with a phone and a performance and a very specific idea of how this morning was going to go. Denny sat where the officers told him to sit and answered every question he was asked. He was not calm about it. He was visibly afraid, his hands not quite steady when he moved them, his voice cracking once in the middle of a sentence about the previous robberies. But he did not stop. He did not revise or minimize. He talked for 12 minutes without prompting, and the officer taking his statement had to ask him to slow down twice. Nora watched this from her seat, with Kodiak against her leg, and said nothing. A detective arrived 20 minutes in. A woman named Vasquez, early 40s, in a dark jacket and flat shoes, with the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that the scene would still be the scene regardless of how fast she moved through it. She spoke briefly to the uniform officers, reviewed Denny's statement on the officer's notepad, looked at the live stream footage one of the officers had pulled up on his phone, and then came and sat in the seat across from Nora. "You want to tell me what happened?" Vasquez said. "It's on video," Nora said. "Continuous. He was running it the whole time." "I know, I still want to hear it from you," Nora told her. It took 6 minutes, and she spoke without editorializing, moving through the sequence in chronological order, with the same specificity she used to give incident reports at the hospital. Who did what, in what order, with what observable effect. She did not characterize Troy's motivations. She did not describe her own emotional state. She stated facts. Vasquez listened without interrupting, and when Nora was finished, she looked at Kodiak. "Military working dog?" "Retired. He came home with me." "What branch?" Nora looked at her steadily. "Army." It was not a lie. It was a portion of the truth selected for its ability to end the line of questioning without provoking it. The Army answer was sufficient and accurate and told Vasquez everything she needed while telling her nothing she would feel compelled to follow up on. Vasquez accepted it. "We're going to need a formal statement," she said. "Today, if possible." "I have a shift tonight." "Morning, then." Nora agreed. What she did not know yet, sitting on the bus with Kodiak's warmth against her leg and Vasquez's card tucked into her bag, was that the formal statement she would give the following morning was not going to be the most significant conversation she would have in the next 18 hours. What she did not know was that the live stream had been running to an audience of approximately 400 people at the time of the incident, and that in the hour since Owen Birch had pulled over on Danner Street, that number had been growing at a rate that had nothing to do with Troy's regular viewership, and everything to do with what those 400 people had shared, and what those shares had generated, and what the platform's algorithm had done with the sudden engagement spike. She didn't know any of that yet. She was thinking about Kodiak's trembling, and about the specific angle of the bat when Troy had raised it, and about a corrugated metal rooftop in Baraka Province, and about Dale Mercer, and about the fact that she had not slept in 22 hours. Owen Birch came down the aisle after the officers had finished with him, moving carefully around the evidence markers the forensic officer had placed near the broken eggs. He stopped at Nora's row. "You need a ride?" he said. "My supervisor's sending a replacement driver. I'm done for the morning." "I'm fine." "I know you're fine." He said it without irony. "I'm asking if you need a ride." She looked up at him. He was a large man with calloused hands and a face that had the particular texture of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors and in transit and had decided long ago that people were mostly worth the trouble they caused. He was not looking at her with the expression people sometimes used, the half-awed, slightly uncomfortable look that followed the realization that someone they had assessed as ordinary was something else entirely. He was looking at her the way he might look at a colleague after a difficult shift, with recognition, but without theater. "I'm fine," she said again, more quietly. He nodded once and went back up the aisle. The replacement bus that came for the remaining passengers was smaller, a mid-route vehicle that smelled of pine cleaning solution, and Nora and Kodiak rode it the rest of the way to the dockside neighborhood in near silence. She had the entire back row to herself. Most of the remaining passengers were taking the opportunity not to look at her, which she appreciated. The man in the dark jacket was not on the replacement bus. She had noticed, when the passengers transferred, that he was gone. She had not seen him leave. She did not know his name. She had not, in fact, fully registered his presence during the incident because he had been at the back and quiet, and there had been more immediate priorities. But some part of her had logged him the way she logged everything, and his absence from the replacement bus registered now as a data point without a category. She filed it and let it go. Her apartment was on the third floor of a building on Cassidy Lane, 3 blocks from Fenner Creek, in a neighborhood that was not quite gentrified and not quite not. The building had been built in the 60s and had not been significantly updated since, which meant the elevator worked intermittently and the stairwell always smelled faintly of old carpet, but the ceilings were high and the walls were thick, and it was quiet in the way that only buildings with mass to them are quiet. She had chosen it for the walls. Kodiak went to his water bowl immediately. She stood at the kitchen sink and ran cold water over her wrists, a habit she had picked up from a combat medic in her second year of service, the idea being that the pulse points cooled the system faster than anything else. She did not know if it was physiologically accurate. She did it anyway. She ate something, crackers and peanut butter, standing at the counter, not tasting it. She changed out of her scrubs. She set 2 alarms, one for noon, one for 2 in the afternoon, which would give her time to prepare before her evening shift. She did not shower because she knew that if she got into the shower, she would stand there until the hot water ran out, and she did not have that kind of time. She lay down on the bed with her jacket still on. Kodiak jumped up beside her, turned twice, and settled with his head on her ankle. She stared at the ceiling. The bat. The sound of it against his tag. The angle of it coming down. Dale Mercer's voice on the radio, that last morning, calm and specific. "We've got movement on the east side. I'm taking Kodiak around the..." And then the sound of the roofing coming down and the radio going to static, and the 15 seconds it had taken her to reach him, which had been both the fastest she had ever moved in her life and 14 seconds too slow. She had not talked about Dale Mercer to anyone at Meridian General. She had not talked about him to anyone in Portwell. She had not talked about him to the VA counselor she had seen twice before deciding she was fine. She was not fine. She knew she was not fine in the same way she knew a patient's chart was wrong before she could articulate exactly which number was off. Instinctively, through pattern recognition, through the gap between what the information said and what the underlying reality was. She was managing. She was functional. She was a good nurse, and she was keeping Kodiak alive and healthy, and she was paying her rent on time, and none of these things were the same as being fine. She was asleep in 4 minutes. The noon alarm went off, and she silenced it without opening her eyes. The 2 o'clock alarm went off, and Kodiak put his paw on her chest. "Okay," she said. She sat up. Her phone had 47 notifications, which was approximately 45 more than it had ever had simultaneously. She looked at this number for a moment with the blank incomprehension of someone whose brain has not yet completed its morning boot sequence, then unlocked the screen. The first notification was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Is this the woman from the Route 9 bus? This is Harold Spence's daughter. He told me what you did and I wanted..." She scrolled down. 3 missed calls from Meridian General's main number. Not the nursing floor. The main number, which routed to administration. A text from her colleague Priya, who worked the trauma floor with her. "Nora? What is going on? Someone showed me a video and I need to know if that's you. Please call me." 11 notifications from a social media app she hadn't opened in 4 months. She did not open it now. 2 voicemails. She played the first one. It was from a man who identified himself as the communications director for Portwell City Hospital Network, and his tone had the particular quality of someone who was performing warmth while primarily managing a situation. "Ms. Callahan, we've become aware of the incident on Route 9 this morning, and we just want to reach out and make sure you're doing all right, and also to let you know that Meridian General stands fully behind." She deleted it before it finished. The second voicemail was from a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. She listened to it twice. The man's voice was measured and clear and identified himself as working for an office she was not going to name. And what he said was brief and specific and included a callback number and a reference code that she recognized from a context she had not expected to encounter again. She sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in her hand. Kodiak watched her. "Don't look at me like that," she said. He looked at her like that. She called the number. The man who answered confirmed the reference code and told her, in the same measured tone as the voicemail, that a Colonel James Rourke of the Defense Intelligence Recovery Unit had become aware of the incident on Route 9 and had requested that contact be made. The word requested was doing a particular amount of work in that sentence. Nora understood the weight of it. "What does Colonel Rourke want?" she said. "To talk to you," the man said. "Today, if possible." "I have a shift tonight." A brief pause. "He's aware of your schedule, Ms. Callahan. She was quiet for a moment. "What time?" she said. The coffee shop on Aldrich Street was called Mariner's, which was either a nod to the city's waterfront history or someone's surname. Nora had never determined which. She had chosen it because it was 3 blocks from her apartment, had a corner booth she could put her back to the wall in, and was rarely crowded on weekday afternoons. She arrived 12 minutes early and ordered black coffee and sat in the corner with Kodiak under the table and her medical bag on the seat beside her and watched the door. The man who came through it at 4 minutes past 3 was not what she had expected, which was itself information. He was in his late 50s, compact and direct in the way of men who have spent decades in institutions that reward economy of movement. He wore civilian clothes, dark trousers, a gray sweater, and carried nothing except his own presence, which had a quality she recognized, the absolute absence of the performance of authority, which was what real authority looked like when it didn't need to prove itself. He was also the man from the back of the bus. She had known, somewhere below conscious processing, when she saw the number's area code. She looked at him now and confirmed it without expression. He sat across from her and did not order anything from the server who appeared. "You made me," he said. "Dark jacket," she said. Back row. "You were on before Callaway Street, which means you were watching from the start." He nodded. "I was riding Route 9 for the 3rd time this week. There have been a series of incidents on that corridor. We were aware of Sabin, that's his name, Troy Sabin, as a person of interest in connection with something larger. Larger than bus robberies." "Larger than bus robberies," he confirmed. Nora wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Then why wasn't he picked up before this morning?" "Because the thing he's connected to is bigger than Troy Sabin, and picking up Sabin before we had the full picture would have closed off lines we weren't done following." He paused. "I'm sorry for what happened on that bus. I want you to know that that's genuine and not procedural." She looked at him. "How did you know who I was?" "The patch on your bag." She had forgotten about the patch. She forgot about it the way she forgot about her figure-8 knots. It was simply part of the object, had been there so long it had become invisible to her. To someone who knew what they were looking at, it was a unit designation from a program so specifically classified that the number of people who would recognize it was very small. James Rourke was one of them. "You were black-tied," he said. She neither confirmed nor denied this. "Sergeant First Class Callahan," he said. "I know your file. I know Mercer's file. I know what happened in Baraka Province." The name in his mouth was... She breathed through it. She took a sip of coffee. "What do you want, Colonel?" He put both hands flat on the table. It was a gesture of transparency, deliberate and noted. "Troy Sabin is not the end of this. He's a distribution point. He moves stolen goods and cash through the transit system on behalf of a network that has been operating in Portwell for about 18 months. The robbery pattern you interrupted today is one node in a structure that includes 3 other cities and a federal theft and trafficking investigation that has been running for 14 months. Nora was very still. "Sabin's livestream," Rourke continued, "has now been viewed approximately 200,000 times. It is, as of this afternoon, the most significant piece of uncontrolled footage connected to this investigation. It shows his face, his methods, his associates' cooperation with law enforcement, and several interactions that are directly relevant to federal charges we have been building a case for." "It also shows me," Nora said. "Yes. You're telling me that the 200,000 people who have now watched that video know I exist." "They know a version of you exists," he said. "They know what you look like, and that you stopped a man with a bat on a city bus. They don't know your name, your background, or your unit, yet." The word "yet" sat between them. "The media inquiry started this morning," he continued. Portwell Tribune, 2 local affiliates, and a national outlet have all made formal requests through Meridian General for the name of the nurse on the bus. The hospital has declined to comment, which buys perhaps 48 hours before someone identifies you from the footage through other means. Nora set down her cup. "What are you proposing?" "I'm not proposing anything. I'm informing you of a situation and asking what you want to do about it." "That's a proposal dressed up as information." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the acknowledgement of one. "You want to stay invisible," he said. "I understand that. I also want to tell you that staying invisible in this specific situation may not be in your interest or the investigations." "Why not?" He reached into his sweater's inner pocket and placed a folded paper on the table. Not a document, a photograph, printed on plain paper. It showed a man she did not know, mid-30s, in a restaurant. His name is Victor Harlan, Rourke said. He runs the network that Sabin works for. He has been very careful for 14 months. He has not made a single significant mistake. He paused. Until this morning, when one of his distribution points ended up on a live stream being physically restrained by a veteran whose identity, if it becomes public in the wrong way, connects directly to a federal case Harlan does not know exists. Nora looked at the photograph. He's going to want to know who I am, she said. He's already trying to find out. The coffee shop's ambient noise, the espresso machine, the quiet conversation at the counter, the sound of rain beginning on the window, continued around them in perfect, indifferent normalcy. Nora looked at the photograph and then at Rourke. You want me to be findable, she said. I want you to make an informed decision, he said. What I'm telling you is that if Harlan finds you first, without coordination, the situation becomes significantly more complicated than if you are aware of him before he identifies you. How long until he has my name? 16 hours. Maybe 20. She thought about her shift at Meridian General, starting at 7 that evening. She thought about the 47 notifications on her phone. She thought about Vasquez's card in her bag, and the formal statement she was supposed to give in the morning, and the voicemail from the hospital's communications director that she had deleted. She thought about Dale Mercer. She thought about the way Kodiak had gone still under the bat. Not scared exactly. Caught in a loop between the past and the present, unable to get traction in either, held in place by the gap. She knew that gap. I need to think, she said. Of course. I'm not agreeing to anything today. I'm not asking you to. She looked at him across the table. You were on that bus 3 times this week. You watched Sabin's previous incidents. We documented them. You documented them, she said, without intervening. The pause that followed was brief and calibrated and told her everything. The calculation at the time, I know what the calculation was, she said. I've made that calculation. I understand why you made it. She picked up her cup. I'm just telling you that I know what it is, so we don't have to pretend it's something else. Rourke was quiet for a moment. Sergeant Callahan, he said. Not a correction, a choice. I've been out for 14 months. I know. How's Portwell treating you? It was such an ordinary question that it briefly disoriented her. She looked at him and found that the question was, in fact, sincere. I'm managing, she said. And the dog? She glanced down at Kodiak under the table. He had his chin on his forelegs and one eye half open. He has bad days, she said. So do you. It was not a question. She didn't answer it. I'll call the number by 8 tonight, she said. Either way. He nodded and stood, replacing the photograph in his pocket. He paused before leaving. For what it's worth, he said, the passengers on that bus will not forget what they saw this morning. Harold Spence already called his daughter. She called the Tribune. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. They're going to tell that story whether or not you choose to engage. The question is whether your version of it is in the room. He left the way he had arrived, without theater, without looking back. Nora sat in the corner booth for 11 more minutes. The rain on the window picked up. Kodiak put his paw on her foot. She paid for the coffee she had barely drunk and walked home in the rain without an umbrella, because she had a shift to prepare for and a decision to make. And she had learned a long time ago that there was no useful distinction between walking toward something and walking into it. By the time she arrived at Meridian General at 6:53, the situation at the hospital had developed in her absence in ways that a 14-month-old voicemail from a communications director could not have anticipated. The administrator on duty, a brisk woman named Director Yolanda Marsh, met Nora at the nursing station with the expression of someone who had spent the afternoon fielding phone calls and had a specific set of conclusions to share. We have a situation, Marsh said. I know about the media inquiries, Nora said, moving past her toward the locker room. Marsh kept pace. It's more than media. We received a visit this afternoon from a man representing the Portwell City Hospital Network's parent board. He wanted to discuss whether your continued employment here, while this situation is generating public attention, constitutes a liability for the institution. Nora stopped walking. She turned around. He used the word liability. He used the word liability, Marsh confirmed. Her tone had changed slightly. She had delivered the message she was apparently obligated to deliver, and was now, just barely, showing Nora which side she was personally on. He also suggested that a temporary administrative leave while the situation is assessed might be in everyone's interest. "He's not employed by this hospital," Nora said. "No, he represents the parent board." "Did he have anything in writing?" "Not today." Nora looked at her steadily. "Then I have a shift in 7 minutes." Marsh held her gaze for a moment, and something in her expression settled. "The board rep is coming back tomorrow morning. I want you to be prepared for that." "I will be." She went to the locker room, changed, and was at the nursing station with 3 minutes to spare. Priya was already there, her expression cycling rapidly between professional neutrality and the overflowing curiosity of someone who had spent all day watching a video of her colleague disarming a man with a baseball bat and had many, many questions. "Before you say anything," Nora said, "I need the overnight handoff first." "Obviously," Priya said. "Obviously, after handoff." "Fine, yes, after handoff." The handoff took 12 minutes and was thoroughly normal, which was the part of Nora's evening that she had expected to be ordinary, and was. The rest of it became, gradually and then quickly, not ordinary at all. The first sign was the patient in Bay 7, a 40-year-old man admitted with a chest laceration from a workplace accident, who recognized Nora from the video and made the mistake of commenting on it loudly enough for the attending physician to hear. The attending, a man named Dr. Keene, with whom Nora had a professional relationship that was functional but not warm, pulled her into the corridor. "Tell me this isn't going to become a disruption," he said. "It's not going to become a disruption. The board is—" "I know about the board." He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who is choosing between two different types of discomfort and has not yet identified the lesser one. "We have 2 journalists who have been calling the main line asking for a statement on your employment status." "My employment status is that I'm a nurse on this floor and I start in 4 minutes. He opened his mouth and then apparently decided that the conversation was over. She agreed with this assessment and returned to the station. What nobody at Meridian General knew yet, Nora herself did not know yet, because she had turned her phone to silent before entering the building, was that the video had crossed 500,000 views in the last 2 hours, that a national morning show had made contact with Harold Spence's daughter, that 3 other passengers from Route 9, including Owen Birch, had given informal interviews to a local affiliate that was preparing a segment for the 11 o'clock broadcast, and that in an office building 12 blocks away, in a room that did not appear on the building's official directory, a man named Victor Harlan was looking at a still image from the live stream, a frame captured at the moment Nora had turned around and looked at Troy with that particular expression, and making inquiries that had nothing to do with the media and everything to do with a question he had been trained, across many years of careful operation, never to leave unanswered. He had a name by 9:47. He had her employer by 10:15. At 10:23, a man Nora had never seen before walked into the Meridian General emergency entrance, asked to speak with a charge nurse, and identified himself as a private patient inquirer looking for a family member. He was not looking for a family member. He was looking at the nursing station. He was looking at her. And Nora, who was updating a chart at that precise moment with her back partially to the entrance, did not see him. But Kodiak, lying at the base of her station where he was technically not supposed to be, but where nobody had yet found the will to make an issue of it, raised his head from his paws and fixed his eyes on the entrance with the particular quality of attention that was not a growl and not a warning, but was the precise precursor to both. His tail had gone completely flat. Kodiak did not bark. That was the thing that cut through the ambient noise of the emergency department and landed in Nora's awareness before she had consciously processed why 7 years of working beside him had trained her to read his silences as precisely as his sounds. And this particular silence had a texture to it that pulled her head up from the chart before she had finished the sentence she was typing. She turned. The man at the entrance was ordinary in every deliberate way. Medium height, dark coat. The kind of face that was assembled from features that canceled each other out into forgettability. He was speaking to the intake coordinator with the relaxed patience of someone who had done this before, in various hospitals, in various cities, and had learned that the most useful thing you could be in a medical facility was unremarkable. He was not looking at Nora, which was how she knew he was there for her. She had been looked at all evening. by patients who recognized her from the video, by Dr. Keene, by the 2 nurses from the day shift who had lingered past their end time to find out if she was okay, by Priya, who had managed exactly 40 minutes before abandoning professional neutrality and asking, in the staff bathroom, what it had actually felt like. Being looked at was the texture of the evening. This man was not adding to that texture. He was very carefully subtracting from it, and the effort of that subtraction was visible, if you knew how to see it. Kodiak's tail had not moved. Nora put the chart down, picked up her phone, unlocked it, and typed a text to the number Rourke had given her. "Someone is here. Emergency entrance, dark coat. He's been here 4 minutes." She sent it and put the phone face down on the station counter. Then she turned back to the chart. Priya appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later. "You okay? You went pale." "I'm fine." She wasn't pale. Priya was reading something in her posture that didn't have an accurate surface translation. "Can you take Bay 7 for the next hour? Keene wants updated vitals every 30. "Sure, but I need you to do it now, Priya." Priya looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has identified that the situation is bigger than the information she's been given, and then she went to Bay 7 because she was a good nurse and trusted Nora in the way that people trust colleagues who have never given them a reason not to. The man at the intake desk finished his conversation with the coordinator. He received some form of information. Nora couldn't see what, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused in the way that people pause when they are performing casualness, and his eyes moved across the nursing station. They found Nora. A half-second of contact, not long enough to be called a look, long enough for both of them to understand that the reconnaissance was complete. He left. Nora exhaled through her nose. Her phone buzzed. "Rourke. We have him. Don't leave the floor. There will be someone in the building within 15 minutes. She typed back. "He's already gone." Rourke. "I know. Stay on the floor." She put the phone in her pocket and returned to the chart and finished the sentence she had not finished because the patient in Bay 4 needed their medication adjusted, and that was a fact that existed independently of everything else happening tonight and required her attention regardless. This was the part that nobody who had watched the video would have understood. That the version of Nora Callahan who had stepped inside a bat swing on a city bus this morning was the same person who was now updating a medication chart under fluorescent lights with her hands entirely steady, not because the situation was under control, but because she had learned, across 7 years of operating in conditions that were definitionally not under control, that the work in front of you was always the most useful thing you could do with your hands. She updated the chart. She checked on Bay 4. She was back at the station when the man came through the staff entrance from the east corridor. Not the emergency entrance, not public access, wearing the kind of ID badge that looked exactly like a hospital visitor badge and was not. He was young, early 30s, with the specific physical economy of someone who ran a lot and slept strategically. He did not introduce himself. "He's in a vehicle 2 blocks east," he said, at a volume calibrated for her ears only. "We have eyes on him. Colonel Rourke wants to know if you've made a decision. Tell Colonel Rourke I'm working a shift. He knows. He's asking about the other thing." She looked at the man. He looked back with the patient blankness of someone who delivered messages and did not editorialize. "Tell him yes," she said, "but the terms are mine." The man nodded once and left the way he had come. Nora turned back to the station and found Priya standing 3 feet away, watching her with an expression that had moved fully past professional neutrality into undisguised alarm. "Nora," Priya said, "what is happening?" "I'll explain later." "You said that 2 hours ago." "I know. I'll explain later tonight, I promise." She met Priya's eyes. "Right now I need you to act like you didn't see that." Priya looked at the empty east corridor, looked at Nora, and made a visible decision. "Okay," she said, "but later tonight actually means tonight." "It does." She held. Priya went back to her rounds. Nora worked the rest of her shift with the focused, methodical competence that had gotten her through operating rooms in field conditions with equipment that was never quite right and outcomes that were never quite guaranteed, and the parallel was not lost on her. The way crisis created a kind of clarity that ordinary life consistently refused to provide. At 2:14 in the morning, in the 15-minute break between a wound-packing procedure and a critical chart review, she sat in the staff room with cold coffee and called Rourke. "Harlan has my name," she said when he answered. "And your employer? And your approximate shift schedule. Yes. So he's going to come back. Not him. He won't expose himself directly. He'll send someone with more time and a less forgettable reason to be in the building. A pause. He may already be aware that we had eyes on his man tonight, which means the next approach will be different. How different? That depends on what he's decided you are. Rourke's voice was careful. If he thinks you're a civilian who got lucky on a bus, the approach will be one thing. If he's identified your background, then it's another thing. Yes. She thought about the man in the dark coat, the way his eyes had found her with that half second of contact, the deliberate practiced quality of his forgettability. He's identified my background, she said, or he's close to it. The man he sent tonight wasn't a street-level operative. That was someone who knew what they were looking at. Rourke was quiet for a moment in a way that confirmed her read. We can move you tonight, he said. Temporary relocation while the federal case… No. Nora, no. She said it without heat. I'm not leaving this hospital, I'm not leaving Portwell, and I'm not going into a safe house while a board representative tries to manufacture a liability case against me. If I disappear tonight, the board wins, Harlan concludes. I'm a threat worth neutralizing, and nobody in this hospital has any cover for what I left behind. She picked up the cold coffee and drank it. I told you the terms are mine. This is a term. The silence on the line was longer this time. She could hear faintly the sound of a different space, an office, other voices, the particular ambient noise of a room where multiple things were happening at once. All right, he said finally. Then we accelerate. What accelerating meant, in the specific operational vocabulary of James Rourke and whatever office authorized his badge, was not something Nora was given a complete picture of. What she was given, in a 15-minute conversation conducted in the Meridian General parking structure at 6:15 the following morning, was a partial picture, which was apparently the standard issue. There would be a meeting, not at a coffee shop, at a federal facility in Portwell, which had a civilian-facing name she was not going to use and an interior that bore no relationship to its exterior. The federal case against Victor Harlan was at a stage where the introduction of new evidence, specifically the live stream footage, Denny Rourke's full cooperation, and what the financial analysis team had recovered from the phone records of Troy Sabin's network contacts, had created a window. Windows closed. What do you need from me? She asked. Your formal statement to Detective Vasquez, which you're giving this morning anyway, Rourke said, and your presence at a conversation this afternoon with the federal case team. You don't have to say anything you're not comfortable saying. You don't have to disclose anything about Black Tide or Baraka Province. He paused. But they're going to ask about your assessment of Sabin's operational role, your observations from the bus, and your read on the man who visited the hospital last night. My read. You had 7 seconds of visual contact with him. I'd like to know what you think. She had been thinking about it since the moment the man left. She had turned it over the way she turned over lab results that were almost normal, but not quite, looking for the data point that organized the rest. He wasn't there to identify me, she said. He already had my name by the time he walked in. He was there to assess threat level. He wanted to see how I moved in my environment, who I talked to, how I responded to the space. She looked at the parking structure's concrete pillars, the steady drip from an upper-level drain. He was deciding whether I was a problem that needed managing or a variable that could be used. Rourke looked at her steadily. Used how? He said. I don't know yet. But a man who runs a network through transit systems and uses people like Troy Sabin as distribution points has thought about risk and utility in a specific way for a long time. He doesn't eliminate variables. He incorporates them. She paused. Which means he's going to make contact, not through another operative, directly. Rourke was quiet. You think he's going to approach you himself? Within 48 hours, she said. Probably less. The formal statement with Detective Vasquez took 2 hours and was, in its own way, clarifying. The act of narrating the sequence in the precise, documented language of an official record forced a kind of order onto it that her own internal processing had not yet achieved. Vasquez was thorough and unhurried and asked good questions, including 2 that Nora had not expected, which meant Vasquez was a better detective than her manner initially suggested. The meeting at the federal facility took 3 hours and was not clarifying in the same way. It was a different kind of discipline. Not the discipline of ordered narrative, but the discipline of being in a room with four people who had more information than she did and were sharing it selectively, and of needing to make accurate assessments of what she was being told and what she was not. What she was told: Victor Harlan's network had been operating across Portwell, Denton City, Rainier Falls, and a fourth location she was not named for 14 months. It moved stolen electronics, financial instruments, and busts in the last 6 months, something the federal case team described as documents of interest, which was the kind of phrase that covered a very wide range of possibilities and was specifically chosen for that reason. Troy Sabin had been a transit point. There were 11 others with similar profiles. What she was not told: the specific nature of the documents, the fourth city, and the identity of at least 2 of the other individuals in the room who were introduced by first name only and did not appear to work for any agency she could immediately place. She filed the gaps. She answered the question she was asked. She did not ask the question she was not supposed to ask. At 4:15 in the afternoon, she walked out of the building that had a civilian-facing name and back into Portwell's October, where the rain from the previous day had cleared into the sharp, low-angled light that came with cold fronts in this part of the coast. Kodiak walked beside her. He had been permitted in the building, which told her something about the people in the room. Her phone had a voicemail from Director Marsh at Meridian General. She listened to it on the walk. Marsh's voice was controlled and slightly tired, the voice of someone who had been in a difficult meeting recently. Ms. Callahan, the board representative, returned this morning as expected. I want you to know that I have declined to initiate any administrative review of your employment status. I've also advised the board that doing so in the current climate, given the public attention on this incident, would be inadvisable from the institution's perspective. I'm not asking you to come in for a conversation about this. I'm simply letting you know where things stand. See you tonight. Nora listened to this twice and then put the phone away. She was still processing the voicemail when Kodiak stopped. It was not a dramatic stop. It was the particular quality of halt she had learned over 7 years to treat as serious information. Not a sound, not a smell, not a visible stimulus, but the convergence of several small inputs into a single physical response. His weight shifted back. His ears came forward. His tail dropped to neutral. She stopped too. They were on Aldrich Street, half a block from Mariners, moving through the afternoon pedestrian traffic. Nothing around them was obviously wrong. 2 women with shopping bags, a cyclist, a food delivery person locking their bike to a post, an older man reading something on his phone at the corner. The man at the corner was not reading his phone. He was holding it at an angle that put the screen away from him and his eyes on her, and he had been doing this since at least the previous intersection, which meant he had been tracking her for at least a block and a half, and had the patience and the practiced stillness to do so without making the beginner's mistake of direct eye contact. She did not slow down. She did not alter her route. She continued to Mariners, went inside, and took the corner booth. She ordered coffee. She waited. 4 minutes later, Victor Harlan sat across from her. He was not what the photograph had suggested, which was either because the photograph had been chosen poorly or because Harlan had a way of managing his visible quality depending on context. In the restaurant photo, he had looked like a mid-level businessman. Indistinct, prosperous enough, forgettable. In person, he was something else. A man whose ordinariness was a construction, and who had stopped being entirely careful about whether that was visible. He was perhaps 50, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of eyes that processed rather than received, eyes that were always organizing information rather than simply taking it in. He wore a jacket that was expensive but not ostentatious, and had the manner of someone who had, for a long time, been very good at a thing that he was never going to be able to name. He did not introduce himself. "You had coffee here yesterday," he said, "with the man from D.C." She said nothing. "I'm not recording this," he said. "I'm also aware that you may be. I don't particularly mind either way." He placed both hands on the table, palm up, a deliberate echo of Rourke's gesture, which told her he knew about the meeting and was making sure she knew he knew. "I'm not here to threaten you. I want to be direct about that." "Then what are you here for?" "To understand what kind of problem you are," he said, with a directness that was, she recognized, its own form of control, giving her the truth in the expectation that it disarmed more than concealment would. "My associate on the bus made a significant mistake. The footage has created complications I am managing. What I don't yet know is how much of those complications originate with you independently and how much are being directed through the people you met with today. And you thought asking me directly was the most efficient approach. I found that it usually is, with people who've operated at your level. He looked at her with the assessing quality she had clocked from across the room. Black Tide was a precision program. The people in it were selected for judgment, not just capability. I'm operating on the assumption that you're someone who responds better to a direct conversation than to a situation that escalates because nobody spoke clearly. Kodiak, under the table, had not made any of the sounds or movements that would have indicated aggression. He was doing the same thing he had done at the hospital entrance: the flat tail, the forward ears, the absolute stillness of assessment. "You know about Black Tide," she said. "I know about a lot of programs," he said. "That's a relevant part of the problem for the people you met with today. I know what they're building a case with, and I know it isn't finished, and I know that the variable that changed when your dog's collar was hit on a city bus is the kind of variable that can push a case in either direction." He leaned forward very slightly. "What I'm offering is a conversation, not an arrangement, not a threat. A conversation about what we both want, and whether there's a version of this that doesn't require anyone to make decisions they'll spend a long time accounting for." She picked up her coffee cup and looked at it rather than at him. She was thinking about 14 months, about a network moving through 4 cities, about a category of documents described as of interest in language specifically chosen to obscure their nature, about the 2 people in the federal meeting room who had not been introduced with last names. She was thinking about the fact that Victor Harlan had just told her, in a coffee shop, that he knew what the federal case was built on, which meant either he had a source inside the investigation, or the investigation had a source inside his operation who had told him what he'd need to know, or both of those things were simultaneously true. She set the cup down. "I'm going to need you to be more specific," she said, "about what you think we both want." He studied her for a moment. "You want to keep your job," he said. "You want the board representative to leave you alone. You want the media attention to resolve without your background becoming public in a way you can't control. And you want the dog to stop waking up in the middle of the night." He said the last part with the same even tone as the rest, which made it worse than if he had said it carefully. She kept her face entirely neutral. "And what do you want?" she said. "The footage," he said. "Specifically, the 43 seconds of audio recorded in the last 2 minutes of the live stream, which your federal colleagues have in evidence, and which contains something that has nothing to do with Troy Sabin and everything to do with a conversation that was not meant to be recorded. I want that audio, not suppressed, excised, with proper chain of custody documentation that demonstrates it was never part of the evidentiary record." The coffee shop hummed around them. "You're describing evidence tampering," she said. "I'm describing a negotiation. Those aren't different things." He looked at her with something that was not quite patience and not quite impatience, but somewhere in the complicated territory between them. "Ms. Callahan," he said, "the people you met with today are building something. You are one piece of what they're building. I want you to understand with full clarity that pieces get used and then put down. What I'm offering is a conversation that keeps you from being the piece that gets put down first." She looked at him. He held the eye contact with the steadiness of someone who had made this specific kind of offer before and had developed a tolerance for the silence that followed it. "I need 24 hours, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, to readjustment. He had expected a different response, and the recalibration was small but visible. "You're not refusing," he said. "I'm asking for 24 hours. "What happens in 24 hours? "I think about whether what you're describing is something I can live with," she said. "Isn't that what you'd want? Someone who actually considers it, rather than giving you an answer right now that you can't trust?" He was quiet for 5 seconds. He was a man who understood negotiation structure, and she had just given him a response that was correctly shaped for someone who was genuinely considering, and he was deciding whether it was real or tactical. The problem, she knew, was that it was both. 24 hours, he said. He left his chair and put on his jacket and walked out through the front of Mariners without looking back, exactly the way Rourke had left the day before. And the similarity was not coincidental. Both men had the same fundamental orientation toward exits, purposeful, final, and designed to convey that the conversation was over on their terms. She sat in the booth for 2 minutes after he left. Then she took out her phone and called Rourke. He answered on the second ring. Harlan just left Mariner's coffee shop on Aldrich Street, she said. He sat down across from me 4 minutes ago. He knows about the meeting today. Not generally, specifically. He knew who was in the room. The silence on the line was the specific quality of silence that follows information that reorganizes a situation. He has a source inside, Rourke said, or the source inside has been telling him what to know. There's a difference. She paused. He wants 43 seconds of audio from the end of the live stream. He was specific about the timestamp. He said it contains a conversation that wasn't meant to be recorded. Did he say what conversation? No. Another silence. Nora, Rourke said, and his voice had changed. The operational quality had dropped back a register into something more direct. I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Ask. Was this the first time you've seen him? She thought about the parking structure, the federal facility with the civilian-facing name, the two unnamed people in the meeting room, the specific phrase, documents of interest. Yes, she said. Are you sure? She looked at the table where he had put his hands palm up, and she thought about a man who had known precisely what the federal case was constructed from. And she thought about something he had said, I know what they're building a case with, and the particular verb tense he had used, present progressive, which described ongoing knowledge, not past discovery. Yes, she said. I'm sure. But something had shifted in the back of her thinking, quiet and persistent as a half-heard sound, and she was going to need to find its source before 24 hours ran out. Because if Harlan had a source inside the federal investigation, that source had been there today. And one of the people in that room had a name she hadn't been given. She stayed in the booth for 6 more minutes after the call ended, not because she needed to think, but because moving too quickly after a conversation like that one was a way of performing urgency that she couldn't afford. Harlan would have someone watching the exit. Probably not someone she could identify, but the behavior was standard for a man who had operated carefully for 14 months. And she had just told him she needed 24 hours, which meant he needed to believe she was genuinely considering, which meant she needed to leave Mariners like a woman with a decision to make, rather than one who had already made it. She finished the coffee. She paid. She clipped Kodiak's leash and walked out onto Aldrich Street at a pace that was unhurried and slightly tired. The pace of someone coming off consecutive difficult days, which was also simply accurate. She did not look for the watcher. Looking would confirm she knew one was there. She walked home. Inside the apartment, with the door locked and Kodiak's bowl filled, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything Harlan had said in the precise sequence he had said it, because memory under stress was reliable in the short term and degraded in ways that felt like clarity. She wrote longhand, not on her phone, and when she was done, she looked at the page for a long time. 43 seconds. Specific timestamp. A conversation not meant to be recorded. He had not said whose conversation. He had not said what it contained. He had given her enough to understand what he wanted and withheld enough to prevent her from evaluating why he wanted it. That gap was structural. It was designed. And the reason it was designed that way was that the contents of those 43 seconds would tell her something about Harlan that he did not want her to know before she agreed to help him. She called Rourke. The audio, she said when he answered. I need to know what's in it. A pause. That's not something I can... James. She used his first name deliberately. He was specific about the timestamp, to the second. He knew what was recorded and when. That means he was either on the bus himself, which he wasn't, or someone who was on the bus told him, not Sabin. Sabin was arrested, not Denny Rourke. Denny went into cooperative custody. She looked at her handwritten page. There were 41 passengers on Route 9 this morning. You've interviewed some of them. I need to know which ones. Another pause. Longer. You're thinking the watcher on the bus wasn't just watching Sabin, Rourke said. I'm thinking the man in the dark jacket at the hospital last night wasn't Harlan's first person on the ground today. I'm thinking someone was on that bus before Sabin even got on, and I'm thinking they were there for a reason that has nothing to do with Troy Sabin's robbery operation. The silence that followed was not hesitation. It was calculation. Come in, Rourke said. Not the facility from today. Different location. I'll text you the address. How long? 90 minutes. She looked at Kodiak. He had finished his water and was sitting by the door with the attentive posture of a dog who had noticed that his person had the specific quality of stillness that preceded movement. I'll be there in 60, she said. The second location was a floor of a commercial building on Reed Street, accessed through a freight elevator that required a specific card, and the interior had the particular decor of spaces assembled for function and duration rather than comfort. Folding tables, multiple monitors, cable runs taped to the floor with industrial adhesion. There were 6 people working when Nora arrived, and 2 of them she recognized from the afternoon meeting. The third unnamed person from that meeting was not here. She noted the absence and said nothing about it. Rourke met her at the elevator with the look of a man who had spent the last 60 minutes making calls he had not planned to make, and had found something at the end of them that he would have preferred not to find. "The audio," she said. "Come and look at it," he said. They sat at a monitor station at the far end of the room. The live stream footage had been preserved in full, time-stamped to the frame. Rourke moved the playback to the final 3 minutes, post-confrontation, post-bat, the period after Nora had Troy pinned and was waiting for the officers. The footage from this period was a single angle, Troy's phone, face down on the bus floor where it had landed when he went down. Still live, still recording, capturing sound but an oblique and partial view of the floor and the base of the seat poles. Rourke moved the playback to the 43-second window Harlan had specified. The audio was ambient, the sounds of the bus interior, passengers, the distant approach of sirens. And then, clearly and without distortion, 2 voices from the rear of the bus. Not a full conversation. A fragment, the kind that floats to the surface in the general noise of a situation resolving. The first voice was a man's. Nora recognized it immediately as belonging to the gray-bearded man who had been sitting at the back, the man she had registered and then lost track of, who had not been on the replacement bus. He said, speaking to someone she couldn't see in the footage. "Rourke knows it's compromised. He's running Callahan to flush the source. She doesn't know that's what she is." A second voice, lower, partially obscured by the siren approach. "Timeline?" The gray-bearded man. "Before Harlan moves on the documents. 48 hours, maybe less." Then the officers came through the bus door and both voices stopped. Nora sat looking at the monitor. The room was very quiet around her. "Who is this gray-bearded man?" she said. Not a question, a statement with the shape of a question. Rourke's jaw tightened. "His name is Leonard Voss. He works for my office." She turned and looked at Rourke directly. "He said you know the investigation is compromised," she said. "He said you're running me to flush the source." "Yes." "Is that true?" Rourke held her gaze, partially. She felt the specific quality of cold that was not temperature, the cold of a situation reorganizing itself around information that changed the meaning of everything preceding it. She had felt it before. In the field, in the moment when the map and the terrain stopped matching and you had to decide very quickly whether to trust the map or your eyes. "Explain partially," she said. "I knew the investigation had a leak," Rourke said. "I did not know where it was. I knew that Harlan's response to the bus incident was faster and more specific than it should have been, which told me his source was active and informed. I needed to identify the source before Harlan used it to destroy the case. And I was the mechanism. The bus incident created a natural introduction point. If Harlan moved to identify you, his source would have to communicate with him to do so, and that communication would be trackable." He paused. "I was not using you as bait. You were already in the situation. I was trying to use the situation to find the leak before it collapsed 14 months of work." "Without telling me." "Without telling you," he confirmed. "Because I didn't know how far the compromise went, and you were new enough to the situation that telling you would either put you at risk or I was the leak," she said. "That was a possibility I had to eliminate." She absorbed this. She was not angry in the way that rage presents, the heat, the noise. She was angry in the way that very controlled people are angry, which runs cold and fast and does not show on the surface but affects every subsequent decision with the precision of a calibrated instrument. "Leonard Voss," she said. "He was identified when the audio was analyzed this morning. I've been managing the confirmation since then." "He was in the meeting today." "Yes." "He heard everything the case team presented." "Yes." Rourke's voice was level and tired in equal measure. "He was removed from the building 2 hours ago. He does not yet know we have the audio. He believes the 43 seconds are what Harlan believes they are. Leverage." She turned back to the monitor. "What are the documents?" she said. The ones Harlan is moving, what are they actually? Rourke was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 seconds for a man who communicated as efficiently as he did was a long time. Military contracting records, he said. Procurement falsifications across 3 defense suppliers. 18 months of documentation that connects a network of fraudulent contracts to a congressional appropriations subcommittee. Harlan isn't just running a transit theft ring. That's the funding mechanism. The documents are what the money was built to protect. The room's ambient hum continued. Someone across the floor said something into a phone. A monitor refreshed. The 2 unnamed people in the meeting today, Nora said. Defense Intelligence. And the subcommittee. 1 sitting member, Rourke said, and a former aide who currently works in private contracting. The case is... He stopped. The case is larger than a bus robbery in Portwell. It has been for 8 months. She looked at her hands on the table. Dale Mercer had spent his last 18 months in service as a logistics coordinator for a procurement evaluation unit. She had known this in a general way, the way you know things about colleagues you work alongside, enough to understand the shape of their work without the details. She had not thought about this in 14 months. She was thinking about it now. How connected are the Black Tide files to the procurement records? She said. The quality of Rourke's stillness changed. That's a specific question, he said. It's the question Harlan's source would have been asked to answer if the people using him were looking for exposure points in the investigation. She turned to face Rourke. Dale Mercer's last assignment, the evaluation unit, was it in the procurement chain? Rourke said, yes. She had known. She had known in the same way she knew the medication dosage was wrong before the labs came back, through the gap between what the surface said and what the underlying pattern indicated. She had known since Harlan had put his hands palm up on the table and said, I know what they're building a case with because nobody outside the investigation knew what it was built with unless they had access to materials that connected the defense contracts to the field operations that had been used to justify them, operations like the ones Baraka Province had been part of. He's not trying to protect the audio because of what Voss said, she said. He's trying to protect the audio because in the background, in the ambient noise, there's something else. Something from before the officers arrived. She thought through the timeline. One of the other passengers. Rourke reached across and moved the playback back 4 seconds, to the moment just before Voss began speaking. In the background, almost completely masked by the siren approach, a phone call. 40 seconds in length. Not audible in any useful way, but the cadence of the voice, the rhythm of it, 2 or 3 words at a time with pauses, was the cadence of someone reading a number sequence, a case file number. We ran the voice through analysis this morning, Rourke said. It matches Leonard Voss. He made the call while everyone was focused on you and the officers. He was transmitting the federal case file reference to Harlan's network. He paused. Which means Harlan doesn't just want the audio suppressed. He wants to confirm the file number is not actionable before he moves the documents. And if he confirms it's actionable, he moves the documents before the case can be executed. In which case, 14 months and a congressional corruption investigation go with them. Nora sat back. She thought about 24 hours. She thought about what Harlan expected she was doing right now, which was weighing her options, her job, the board representative, the media attention, the dog's nightmares, against the risk of what he was asking. He expected her to be running a personal cost-benefit calculation because that was the calculation he had offered her. A woman who was tired and trying to rebuild an ordinary life and had stumbled into something too large for her and needed a way out. He had been wrong about Troy Sabin on the bus. He was wrong about her now. I'm going to call him back tonight, she said, not in 24 hours. Tonight. I'm going to tell him I want a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss terms. She looked at Rourke. And I need you to tell me everything about Leonard Voss that you know, because Voss is going to be my term. The meeting she had described to Rourke took 4 hours to construct correctly, and the construction was not elegant. It had the messy, iterative quality of any plan assembled under time pressure by people who disagreed on 3 out of 5 key points and had to find workable compromises on all of them. The federal case team wanted to use the meeting as a direct apprehension opportunity, which Nora argued against on the grounds that Harlan would have a signal protocol with his network, and a premature move would trigger it before the documents were located. The documents were the point. Without the documents, the congressional case collapsed into circumstantial fraud charges that Harlan's lawyers would dismantle in 18 months. She argued for 40 minutes. She was not particularly diplomatic about it. At one point, a case team member told her she was a nurse, not an investigator, and she explained with the specific flatness she used for conversations she was done having that she had spent 7 years in operational contexts that the investigator across the table from her did not have the clearance to know about, and that if they wanted to run this their way, they were welcome to do so without her, and Harlan would have whatever he wanted by morning. The room was quiet after that. Rourke said, "Her way." They did it her way. The call to Harlan that evening was 5 minutes long and entirely straightforward. She told him she had given his proposal serious consideration. She told him she understood the terms. She told him she wanted to discuss one modification before agreeing, and that modification involved Leonard Voss specifically, and that she would explain it at a meeting the following morning. She named a location, not Mariner's, a hotel lobby on Caldwell Street, public and high traffic, which was both genuinely safer for her and the location the case team needed for their operational setup. Harlan was quiet for a moment after she named it. "You've moved fast," he said. "You gave me 24 hours. I didn't need all of them." "No," he said, and she could hear in the single syllable a revised assessment clicking into place. Not suspicion exactly, but the heightened attention of a man who has decided he underestimated something. "Apparently not. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. She agreed. She ended the call and sat in the apartment with Kodiak against her knee and the handwritten page on the table, and she went through the plan piece by piece, not the operational logistics, which the case team would handle, but the actual sequence of the conversation she would need to have tomorrow morning, the specific things she would need to say, and the order in which she would need to say them to keep Harlan in the lobby long enough for the document location to be confirmed and the arrest to be executable. She was not calm about this. She was clear about it, which was different. Her heart rate was elevated in the particular way it elevated before operational deployments, the body's honest acknowledgement of stakes, and she did not perform relaxation about it because performing relaxation was a waste of energy she needed for other things. Kodiak put his head on her knee. "I know," she said. She went to bed at 11 and slept 6 hours, which was not enough and was everything available. The Caldwell Street Hotel lobby was the kind of space designed to absorb large numbers of people into apparent calm. Marble floors, high ceilings, the soft noise of a coffee service station and rolling luggage, and the ambient conversation of people in transit. Nora arrived at 8:40 and walked the space twice, not visibly surveying but covering ground, mapping the acoustics and the exit geometries, and the positioning of the 4 federal agents she knew were already placed and the 2 she assumed she hadn't been told about. She found a seat in the central seating area with clear sightlines to both the main entrance and the elevator bank. Kodiak sat beside her. Harlan arrived at 9:03, which was a communication in itself, late enough to convey that he was not anxious, not so late as to signal disrespect. He crossed the lobby with the same practiced unremarkability he had managed in Mariner's and sat across from her with the ease of someone who had selected his own chairs in hostile rooms for 20 years. "You mentioned Voss," he said, without preamble. "As a term," she said. "I need to understand what you're planning to do with him after this transaction is complete." Harlan studied her. "Why?" "Because if Voss becomes a liability for your operation after you get what you want from me, he becomes a liability for everyone connected to the investigation, including the person who recommended me for my current position at Meridian General." She paused. "Which was Leonard Voss." This was not true, but it was constructed from true components. Voss had indeed been in a position to recommend, had known people connected to Meridian General's administrative structure, and the claim was specific enough to be credible and unverifiable, quickly enough to be useful. Harlan absorbed it. "You're protecting a source," he said. "I'm protecting a relationship," she said, "which is what you'd do." He looked at her with the recalibrating expression she had seen at Mariner's, the adjustment of an estimate upward. "What do you need from me regarding Voss?" "His continued operational usefulness," she said, "meaning you don't burn him after this. You leave him in place." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, I facilitate your access to the audio in a way that creates a clean chain of custody gap. No trace of excision. The file reflects a technical corruption in that timestamp segment." She held his gaze. I know how to do this. I've worked with medical record systems and their audit trails for 7 months. Digital documentation is digital documentation. It was a convincing lie because it was anchored in real competence. She did work with documentation systems. She did understand audit trails. The extrapolation to evidence tampering was false, but the foundation was genuine, and Harlan was smart enough to recognize genuine competence when it was adjacent to what he needed. He was leaning forward very slightly. The tell was small, but she had been reading people in high-stakes environments for long enough to catch it. Timeline, he said. I need access to the evidence system through a terminal that isn't flagged to my personal login, she said. That requires a contact inside the department's digital forensics unit. I need a name from you, someone who can create the access window. Harlan went still. She had asked him for an operational contact inside law enforcement. This was the point where the plan either worked or didn't, where he decided she was either a genuine collaborator presenting a genuine operational need or a mechanism for extracting information. The lobby hummed around them. Why would I give you that? He said. Because without the access window, I'm working in a logged system that creates a record of every intervention, which is worse than no intervention at all. She kept her voice at the level of someone making a practical argument. I'm not asking for a name to use against you. I'm asking for a name to get you what you want. You want the audio. The audio requires access. Access requires a contact. That's the chain. Harlan looked at her for a long time. The tell she had clocked earlier, the slight forward lean, had resolved back into stillness. He was running the same analysis she was. He was deciding if the chain she had described was real or constructed. He reached into his jacket pocket. He placed a folded card on the table. The name and a contact protocol, he said. If you use this for anything other than what we've discussed, you should know that I have resources for addressing that kind of decision. I know, she said. She picked up the card. Harlan stood and buttoned his jacket, and as he did so, two things happened simultaneously. His phone buzzed in his pocket. The vibration pattern of a prearranged signal, she clocked the way his hand moved toward it before stopping. And Leonard Voss walked through the main entrance of the hotel lobby. Voss stopped when he saw Harlan. The expression on his face in that half second was not the expression of a man encountering a colleague unexpectedly. It was the expression of a man seeing something that has gone wrong in a way he cannot immediately calculate. Harlan turned. He looked at Voss. He looked at Nora. In the space between those two looks, the recalculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid assembly of what Voss's presence meant, and what Nora's card acceptance meant, and what the lobby full of people in transit might contain, Nora set the folded card flat on the table where it was visible to the camera positioned in the coffee station 12 feet to her left. Victor Harlan, said a voice from Harlan's right. The federal agent did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're under arrest. Harlan did not run. She had known he wouldn't. Men like him had exit protocols, not flight responses, and his protocol had just failed in several simultaneous ways, which produced a particular quality of stillness rather than movement. He stood with his jacket half buttoned and his hand near the phone in his pocket, and looked at the space around him with the eyes of someone taking a precise inventory of what had gone wrong. Leonard Voss turned for the entrance. He made it 4 steps. 2 agents she genuinely had not been told about came in through the revolving door, and Voss stopped with the absolute physical completeness of a man who has run out of directions. Nora watched him. He looked at her across the lobby, and his face had the quality of a calculation that had been running for a long time and had just returned an error. She did not look away. Harlan was being walked toward the entrance in handcuffs. Not rough, not theatrical, the quiet efficiency of a federal arrest. When he turned his head and looked at her one last time, the expression on his face was not anger. It was the specific, contained acknowledgement of a man who has made an accurate assessment too late. The terms were yours, he said. They were, she said. He was walked through the door. The lobby continued around Nora in its ordinary way. Luggage rolling, coffee station humming, 2 business people near the elevator discussing something about a flight connection. The marble floor reflected the morning light from the high windows. Kodiak sat beside her with his chin up and his ears slightly forward, the posture of a working dog who has processed an event and returned to baseline. Rourke appeared at her left elbow and sat in the chair Harlan had vacated. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at the folded card on the table, which an agent had already photographed and would shortly place into evidence. "The contact on the card," Nora said. "Is it a real name?" "We'll know within the hour," Rourke said. "If it's real, it's the fourth city," she said. "The one you didn't name in the meeting." He looked at her. "Harlan doesn't give operational contacts without a reason," she said. "He gave me that card because he expected to use me and the card together, which means the contact is active and current and connected to wherever the documents are being held." She paused. "The fourth city." Rourke picked up the card with a gloved hand from an agent who materialized beside him. He read the name on it. Something shifted in his face. A small, rapid reorganization. "Nora," he said. "What?" He turned the card so she could see the name. She read it. The name meant nothing to her immediately. And then it did. Not from Portwell, not from Meridian General, not from the bus or the investigation or anything connected to the last 4 days. From 7 years earlier, from a logistics evaluation unit in a procurement chain. From the name on a field report she had countersigned because Dale Mercer had asked her to, in the last week before Baraka Province. The person named on the card had co-authored that report, and they were currently employed according to the federal agency's records. Rourke was pulling it up on his phone with the speed of someone who has just needed to confirm something urgently, as the senior administrator of Meridian General Hospital, Director Yolanda Marsh. The name sat on the card and Nora looked at it with the particular stillness of someone who has just had a large piece of architecture shift beneath their feet and is deciding, in real time, whether the structure is going to hold. Yolanda Marsh. She thought about the voicemail. "I have declined to initiate any administrative review of your employment status. I've also advised the board that doing so in the current climate would be inadvisable." She had heard it as protection. She had been grateful for it in the distracted, tired way she was grateful for things she didn't have to fight. She had not asked why Marsh had chosen to protect her, because it had seemed like the right call and people occasionally made right calls without ulterior architecture behind them. She had been wrong to not ask. "How long?" she said. Rourke was still reading from his phone, moving fast through whatever database had just opened for him. The procurement report Mercer co-authored. Marsh was listed as an administrative approver for the contracting division it evaluated. If she flagged the report before it moved up the chain, she could have buried it, Nora said, or delayed it, or ensured the evaluation unit was redirected before the report reached anyone who would act on it. She paused. "Dale was reassigned 3 weeks after we filed that report. He requested the reassignment. I always thought he requested it." "The request came from the administrative level," Rourke said quietly. His signature was on it. "Forged or coerced. Both are possible." She stood up. Not dramatically. She simply needed to be on her feet. And she was. The hotel lobby continued its indifferent functioning around her. The arrest had been managed quietly enough that most of the guests hadn't identified it as an arrest. 2 men had been walked out by other men in the way that hotels occasionally walked out guests who had caused problems, and the business of travel had continued without significant interruption. "She doesn't know you have her name yet," Nora said. "She knows Harlan was arrested. Word moves." Rourke pocketed his phone. "We have approximately 2 hours before she calculates her exposure and makes a decision about how to respond." "What's her play?" "Distance. She'll start building documentation that characterizes her relationship with Harlan as professional and surface level. She'll pull her administrative files for the board meeting. She'll make herself look like someone who was used without knowing it." He paused. "She's been in administrative healthcare for 16 years. She knows how to construct a paper record." Nora looked at him. "She's at the hospital right now," she said. "Yes. And the board representative she sent, the one who came with the liability language, did that come from Marsh originally?" Rourke's expression answered before he did. "She sent someone to build a paper trail that made me look unstable," Nora said. "Liability review, media attention, administrative concern. All of it creating a record that I was a problem employee before anyone connected me to the investigation. So that if my name came out later as part of the case, the hospital could point to prior documentation and say the separation was unrelated." "She was protecting her flanks," Rourke said. "She was eliminating a variable." Nora reached down and touched the top of Kodiak's head. Not for his benefit, she realized, but for hers. A grounding gesture she hadn't planned. She knew about Black Tide. She knew about Baraka Province. She approved the administrative action that redirected Dale away from the evaluation before the report could protect him. And when I showed up in Portwell working in a hospital, she had administrative oversight of, "You were a thread she couldn't afford to leave loose," Rourke said. The cold, clean quality of that settled through her. She had come to Portwell because it was quiet and mid-sized and unremarkable, and because the hospital had a trauma unit that needed night nurses and didn't ask many questions. She had not come to Portwell because of anything connected to Dale Mercer or procurement fraud or congressional subcommittees. She had come because she was tired and she needed somewhere ordinary to learn how to be ordinary again. And the thread had followed her here because threads don't care about your reasons for running. "I'm going to the hospital," she said, "Nora, not to confront her, to do my job." She looked at him with the specific directness that had been, from the beginning, the most honest thing about her. "You have 2 hours before she starts building her paper record. You need someone in that building who can identify what she's accessing and when and whether it constitutes obstruction. I know that building. I know the documentation systems. And I am technically still employed there unless she's already revoked my access, which would itself be a documented administrative action taken in the 2 hours following her associate's federal arrest." She paused. "Put someone on the administrative server. I'll be your eyes inside." Rourke looked at her for a long moment. "You're not doing this because it's operationally useful," he said. "It's both things," she said. "That's allowed." He made a call. It took 4 minutes. She waited. "Go," he said. She arrived at Meridian General at 10:40, which was not her shift and not a time when her presence would be unremarkable, and she walked through the main entrance rather than the nursing entrance, because the main entrance had different camera coverage and a lobby that she could move through with Kodiak without triggering the specific staff recognition pattern that the nursing entrance would. Priya was on the floor. She looked up when Nora appeared at the station, and the look on her face moved through 3 stages quickly: relief, confusion, and the sharpened attention of a person who has been trying to put a puzzle together and has just received a piece. "You're not on until 7, Priya said. "I know. I need to check something." Nora kept her voice low and her pace unhurried. "Is Marsh in?" "She's been in since 7. She had the board rep here until 9:30. Priya stepped closer. "Nora, there was a federal agent here this morning, 2 of them. They talked to someone in administration and then left. Nobody will tell us what it was about." "I know what it was about." "Are you—" "I'll tell you everything tonight. I promise. Right now I need you to keep doing exactly what you're doing and not mention that you saw me." Priya looked at her steadily. She was a good nurse and a careful person, and she had known Nora for 7 months, which was not long in the context of deep friendship, but was long enough to have developed a specific kind of trust, the kind built not on shared history, but on repeated observation of how someone handles pressure. "Okay," she said. Nora went to a documentation terminal in the medication prep room, which had no camera coverage due to a privacy protocol for medication management, and logged into the system with her credentials, which were still active. She sent the access timestamp to the number Rourke had designated and began moving through the administrative file logs, not the patient records, which she had no reason to access, but the administrative documentation layer, which nurses with her cross-departmental training could reach through a specific access pathway that most staff didn't know existed. Marsh had been in the administrative files since 8:14 that morning. She had accessed the board correspondence file, the Human Resources Disciplinary Protocol records, the Employment Verification Archive, and at 9:47, 16 minutes after Harlan's arrest, the Procurement Oversight Liaison file, which was a category Nora had not known existed in Meridian General's system, and which appeared in the administrative layer as a legacy document repository connected to the hospital network's parent board. She photographed the screen with her phone and sent it. Rourke responded in under a minute. "That file connects to the contracting division. She's looking for what's been accessed and by whom. Stay where you are." 3 minutes later. "We have a warrant. Team is moving now." Nora logged out of the terminal and stood in the medication prep room and breathed. She thought about Marsh's voicemail, the carefully controlled voice, the presentation of protection, the way it had landed as something she could be grateful for. She thought about how the most effective manipulation was the kind that looked like kindness, because kindness lowered the defenses that suspicion kept raised, and she had been tired enough and isolated enough that she had let herself be briefly, quietly grateful for something that was actually a fence being built around her. She was not going to perform equanimity about that. It had happened, and it had worked on her, and the fact that she had ultimately identified it didn't clean the residue of it from her thinking. Kodiak pushed his nose against her hand. "I know," she said. "Let's go." She was in the corridor outside the nursing station when Yolanda Marsh walked out of the administrative wing with two people beside her, the board representative, whose name she still didn't know, and a woman in a gray suit who had the specific carriage of a lawyer who has been called in on short notice and is performing competence while internally reorganizing. Marsh saw Nora. The 3-second interval between recognition and response was the most honest thing Nora had ever seen on Yolanda Marsh's face. A rapid, unguarded calculation of options that resolved into the controlled administrative composure of a woman who had spent 16 years managing difficult situations across a desk. "Miss Callahan," Marsh said, "you're not scheduled today." "No," Nora said, "this isn't a good time for—" "4 federal agents are going to walk through that entrance in approximately 6 minutes, Nora said, not loudly. The corridor had 2 nurses and an orderly in it, all of whom had gone quiet. "I thought you should know." The board representative looked at Marsh. The lawyer looked at her phone. Marsh's composure held for another 2 seconds. Then something underneath it shifted, and what replaced it was not panic. She was too controlled for panic, but the specific, careful stillness of a person performing a final calculation about what they can still protect and what has already been lost. "I'd like to speak with you privately," Marsh said. "No," Nora said. Priya had appeared at the nursing station entrance. The orderly had stopped moving. The 2 nurses were very still. "Whatever you want to say," Nora said, "you should say it to the people who are coming through that door." Marsh looked at her with an expression that Nora could not fully name. It was not remorse, and it was not simple coldness, but somewhere in between, the expression of someone who has made a series of decisions that seemed manageable at the time, and has just arrived at the place where they aren't manageable anymore, and is realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the distance between here and there was shorter than they believed. "You were never supposed to be in this," Marsh said. "You came to Portwell on your own. I didn't bring you here." "No," Nora said. "But you tried to make sure I couldn't stay." The main entrance doors opened. The 4 agents came through with the efficiency of people who know the layout of a building they have been briefed on. They moved without theater, without raised voices, with the particular professionalism of federal arrest that leaves no ambiguity about what is happening while creating as little spectacle as possible. The lawyer stepped back. The board representative went pale. Marsh did not move. She stood in the corridor of the hospital she had administered for 9 years, and she did not run, and she did not argue, and she did not look at anyone except, for one final moment, Nora. The look was complicated, and Nora held it without looking away, because she had learned a long time ago that looking away from difficult things was how they found room to grow. Then the agents reached Marsh and the moment ended, and the corridor became the controlled, efficient process of an arrest being conducted by people who knew how to conduct one. The board representative left quickly, which was its own statement. The lawyer began talking on her phone before she reached the elevator. Priya appeared at Nora's shoulder. She didn't say anything for a moment, then, "What just happened?" "I'll explain tonight," Nora said. "You keep saying that." "Tonight I'll actually do it." What came after was not resolution in the clean, sequential sense. It was the messy, exhausting, nonlinear process of a situation unwinding across multiple institutions simultaneously, and Nora was present for some of it and absent from the rest, and only understood the full shape of it over the following weeks in the same way you understand the shape of a storm after it has passed, by surveying what it left. The documents were found in a storage facility in a city called Renwick, 4 hours north of Portwell, in a unit registered to a shell company that the contact name on Harlan's card led the federal team to within 11 hours of the arrest. The documents were intact. 14 months of procurement falsification records, organized with the specific care of someone who had understood their value from the moment they were assembled. The congressional subcommittee member was identified within 48 hours. His name was made public through a press release from the federal attorney's office that was written in the precise, affectless language of institutions communicating facts they would prefer not to have to communicate, and his resignation followed the press release by 3 hours, which was widely noted as an indication that the advice he received was not to fight it. The former aide in private contracting was arrested on a Tuesday in his office, in front of two colleagues who would later describe the moment to a journalist in terms that emphasized their own shock and his complete stillness when the agents came through the door. Victor Harlan was charged with federal racketeering, evidence tampering conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and 6 counts related to the procurement fraud network. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea that nobody in the case team found surprising or concerning. The evidence, by the time the charge sheet was filed, was substantial enough that the plea was largely a procedural formality. Leonard Voss was charged separately. His cooperation with the investigation, which began within hours of his arrest and was apparently both comprehensive and somewhat pathetically eager, was noted in the charge documentation in a way that would eventually reduce his sentence but could not eliminate it. He had spent 11 months feeding active federal case information to a man who used it to protect a fraud network that had, among other consequences, contributed to the circumstances surrounding the death of at least one military service member. The judge who heard his case, several months later, described his culpability in language that was measured and thorough and left him nothing to argue with. Troy Sabin was convicted on the charges connected to the Route 9 incident and the broader robbery pattern. His lawyer attempted to characterize the live stream footage as entrapment, which failed, and to characterize Nora's response to his assault as excessive, which also failed, and in the process of failing generated a second round of public attention on the case that was, if anything, more specifically focused on what the footage actually showed than the first round had been. Denny Rourke, no relation to James, completed his cooperation agreement and entered a rehabilitation program in Denton City. He was 20 years old. Whether that translated into anything useful for him was not something Nora knew or tracked, but she found herself occasionally hoping it did. The formal recognition came 6 weeks after the arrest, at a ceremony in Port Wales City Hall that Nora attended in her hospital scrubs because she had come directly from a shift and had not had time to change and had decided, somewhere on the walk over, that she wasn't going to apologize for that. The mayor spoke. A federal representative spoke. James Rourke sat in the third row and watched with the expression of a man who had orchestrated a significant portion of what was being described and was content to let someone else receive credit for it. The civilian commendation they gave her was a physical object, a medallion on a ribbon, engraved with the city seal and her name. She held it in both hands while the photographer positioned people around her and thought about the specific absurdity of being recognized for a sequence of events that had begun because a man on a city bus had kicked a dog's water bowl. Harold Spence was in the audience. He had come with his daughter, a tall woman in her 50s who had the same precise, unhurried manner as her father, and he caught Nora's eye from across the room with the expression of a man who has decided that certain things deserve to be witnessed in person. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Neither of them had anything to add to that. Owen Birch was also there, in the second row, still wearing what appeared to be his bus driver uniform, which he had either not had time to change out of or had worn deliberately, and either way she respected it. After the official portion, the mayor, a compact, practical woman named Aldridge, who had the manner of someone who had given approximately 1,000 of these ceremonies and approached each one as a genuine rather than procedural obligation, pulled Nora aside. The hospital board has formally dissolved the administrative review and issued an employment confirmation, Aldridge said. Marcia's replacement is interim for now, but the board rep who initiated the liability conversation has also resigned. The institution's position is that your employment was never in question. That's not what their position was 6 weeks ago, Nora said. No, Aldridge agreed without apology on anyone's behalf. It wasn't. She looked at Nora with the directness of a person who had gotten to where she was by being honest in situations where honesty was expensive. For what it's worth, and I know it's complicated what that's worth at this point, the nursing staff at Meridian General sent a formal letter to the board in the first week. 23 signatures. Your colleague Priya organized it. Nora absorbed this. She hadn't known. She didn't tell you, Aldridge said. It was not a question. No. Probably because she thought you'd tell her not to. Nora looked across the room at Priya, who was talking to Harold Spence's daughter with the animated, direct energy she brought to everything, and who had not yet noticed that she was being looked at. She would have been right, Nora said. Aldridge almost smiled. The city is grateful, Ms. Callahan. Not for the dramatics, for the judgment. Anyone can be brave when they have no choice. Knowing when to act and how to act and what to do after, that's the part people get wrong. She moved away to speak with someone else, the way mayors do, with the smooth transition of someone who has learned to end conversations at their highest point rather than past it. Rourke found her by the window 20 minutes later, when the formal portion had dissolved into the ambient social noise of an event winding down. "The Baraka Province report," he said. "Mercer's evaluation. It's been resubmitted through proper channels, with the administrative interference documented as part of the procurement fraud record." He paused. "His findings are part of the evidentiary record now. The work he did, it's on the record." She looked out the window at the October street, the same low, sharp light as the morning after the rain. She had spent 14 months not thinking about Dale Mercer's work, because thinking about it meant thinking about the person who had done it, which meant thinking about the morning in Baraka Province, which was a place she had built very careful walls around and reinforced regularly with the specific labor of keeping busy. The walls had come down anyway, not in a dramatic collapse, in the gradual, inconvenient way of things that were never structural to begin with, only convincing. "His name is on the record," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "He would have hated this kind of event," she said. "What kind?" "This kind. Official. Everyone standing around waiting for permission to leave." She almost smiled. "He would have stayed for exactly 11 minutes and then found a reason to be somewhere with better coffee." Rourke said nothing. He was allowing her the space of the memory, which she recognized as a specific kind of respect. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the record, not for the ceremony, for the thing that couldn't be given back but could be acknowledged." He nodded. She walked home afterward through the streets of Portwell, with Kodiak beside her and the medallion in her coat pocket, and the light failing in the way it failed in October in a coastal city, quickly, unapologetically, without the long-drawn negotiation of summer evenings. She was tired in the deep tissue way that followed sustained intensity, the kind of tired that sleep addressed but didn't fully resolve. She was also something else, and it took her the length of 2 blocks to identify it accurately. She was present. Not performing presence, not maintaining the practiced functional alertness of someone who has learned to simulate being in the moment, actually present, in the specific, unremarkable way of someone who is in a place they are not trying to leave. Portwell was ordinary. It was a mid-sized coastal city with too much traffic on Harmon Avenue and a transit system that needed more oversight, and a November coming that would be cold and gray and require better coat choices than she currently owned. It was not a mission environment or a temporary situation or a placeholder while she figured out what came next. It was where she lived. Kodiak walked beside her with his ears forward and his stride easy, the stride of a dog who was not carrying the weight of a previous hour or anticipating the weight of a next one. She watched him for a moment, the simple physical fact of him moving through an ordinary evening on an ordinary street, and something in her chest that had been clenched in a particular way for a long time loosened one increment, not healed, not resolved, one increment. She was not going to tell herself a story about the rest of it, about Dale Mercer and Baraka Province, and the figure-8 knots, and the nights when Kodiak woke up trembling and she sat on the floor beside him and talked him through it in the same low, precise voice she had used on the bus. Those things didn't end because the situation around them had been resolved. They would require the slow, inglorious work of time and attention, and probably more than 2 sessions with the VA counselor she had been telling herself for months that she didn't need. She had been wrong about that. She knew she had been wrong about that. She would call in the morning. On Cassidy Lane, outside her building, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a text from a number she didn't have saved, with a Portwell area code. "This is Harold Spence. My daughter found your number through the department. I hope that's all right. I wanted to tell you something I didn't get to say at the event tonight." She stopped on the sidewalk. Another buzz. "My wife is in a memory care facility on the east side of the city. I visit her every morning on the Route 9 bus. She doesn't know me most days, but I bring her eggs from the market. She always liked eggs. The morning your dog was on the bus was the morning I was bringing her birthday eggs. I know that sounds small compared to the rest of it." Another. "I just wanted you to know what you were protecting, even if you couldn't have known. People always think the important things are the big things. In my experience, the important things are usually the eggs." She stood on the sidewalk and read the messages twice. The street was quiet. A car passed. Somewhere above her in the building, a window was lit yellow, and she could see the shadow of someone moving through an ordinary evening room in the ordinary way of people who do not know they are being watched and would not change what they were doing if they did. She typed, "Thank you for telling me. I'm glad the eggs got there." She put the phone in her pocket. She went inside. The thing about being underestimated is that it requires a decision, not from the person doing the underestimating. That part is usually automatic, assembled from whatever materials fear and laziness and the need to feel larger have on hand. The decision belongs to the person being looked through, looked past, looked at, and found wanting before a single true thing about them has been observed. The decision is what to do with the gap between who they think you are and who you actually are. Nora Callahan had made that decision on a Route 9 city bus on an October morning, not because she was looking for the moment or had been waiting for permission or had finally reached some threshold of readiness that unlocked the version of herself she had been withholding. She had made it because a man raised a bat at a dog who had already survived more than that man would ever understand. And something in her that was older and more fundamental than fear simply would not move aside. That was not heroism. Heroism was a category she had always found slightly suspicious, applied retroactively to actions that, in the moment, were just the only available response to an intolerable thing. What it was clarity. And clarity, she was learning, was not a state you achieved and then kept. It was a practice. It was the daily discipline of choosing to see what was actually there rather than what was comfortable, to act on accurate information rather than the story you had told yourself to make the situation manageable. It was what she brought to medication dosages and chart audits, and the moments when a patient's lab said one thing and the patient's body said something different, and she had to trust the body over the documentation. It was, she thought, on the third-floor landing of her building with Kodiak beside her and her keys in her hand, also what came next. Not the investigation. That was finished. Not the recognition, which would fade in the way that public attention always faded, absorbed back into the ongoing noise of a city's life. What came next was the ordinary, imperfect, daily work of being someone who had come home and chosen to stay. She unlocked the door. She fed Kodiak. She changed out of the hospital scrubs and put them in the wash. She made tea and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the handwritten page from 4 days ago, the one she had written after Harlan left Mariners, organizing what he had said into a sequence she could think through. She turned it over and wrote on the back. Not notes, not a list, just the name, Dale Mercer. And underneath it, because it was true and she owed it to him to say it plainly where only she would read it, "You were right about the report. I should have pushed harder. I'm sorry I didn't." She looked at the words for a moment. Then she folded the page and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, next to the medallion. She was not done grieving him. She might not be done for a long time. But she had made the decision, in the same quiet, irrevocable way she made the decisions that mattered, to stop treating the grief as evidence of weakness and start treating it as what it actually was, evidence of someone worth grieving. Kodiak jumped onto the bed and turned twice and settled, his chin on the pillow she didn't use. She sat beside him for a while. Outside, Portwell continued its ordinary evening, buses running their routes, the transit corridor on Danner Street quiet now, the Route 9 stop at Callaway Street lit by its single overhead lamp in the dark. Harold Spence would be on that bus tomorrow morning with whatever eggs he managed to find. Owen Birch would probably be driving it, his hands on the wheel, 19 years of patience carrying him through another ordinary run. The world that had tried to make itself small enough for her was still the same world. The buses still ran. The hospital still needed nurses on the night shift. The streets of Portwell still had too much traffic and not enough decent coffee. And the winter that was coming would be cold in the specific, damp, relentless way of coastal winters that got into your bones and stayed. She was still tired. She was still imperfect. She still woke sometimes at 3 in the morning with the particular quality of silence that meant Kodiak had heard something, or thought he had, or was somewhere between the present and a province that no longer existed except in the nervous system of a dog who had survived it. But she was here. Plainly, stubbornly, without drama or performance, or the need for anyone to observe it and call it something. She was here. That, she had finally decided, was enough to begin with.